So, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on getting paid in China. Getting paid in China is obviously a crucial issue for any company who wants to build a successful business in China. In fact, it's a crucial issue, obviously, wherever you're doing business, but it's an especially important topic in China because it's often such a pain point for companies who are doing business out there. So this webinar will give you some context to getting paid in China and why it's such a challenge, and also some quick fire tips on how to improve your ability to get paid in China when you are doing business out there. So firstly, to set the scene for the rest of this webinar, and indeed to set the scene for your entire business in China, I want to emphasize the importance of structuring payment, as it can often be the difference between success and failure for your business in China. We have supported over £35 million worth of trade with China since 2007, and therefore we have seen hundreds of cases whereby clients have got this right, and as a result built a successful business in China. We've also seen many cases where clients have got this wrong and have exited China early on as a result. We all want to avoid that situation, and so I want to share a couple of stories with you that emphasize the importance of getting payment right first time in China. So just a couple of stories to emphasize this point, and the first one is from a Japanese client that we have helped in the past. And they sold the usage of emojis and stickers to Chinese clients. And the reason why I mentioned this story is because even before they entered into negotiations with any client in China, they thoroughly mapped out all of the different options available to them. So that included transacting with their international company in Japan. It included transacting with a local agent in China, setting up their own subsidiary in China as well. And for each option, what they did was mapped out the tax rates and the net margin for themselves, and also the risks and liabilities for each one. And although at the time, some stakeholders were wondering why spend so much time on all of the details, why not just generate the business first, sell the tickets and then organize the party. But what this resulted in was every customer that they approached in China, they had the ability to confidently tell them exactly what the price would be based upon their requirements. So if they had a customer who said, we can only pay you within China, we can only transact locally, they're able to give their price and an option for that, ditto with all of the other options as well. The result, the execution of deals and rapid growth in China. So on the contrary, we have worked with companies, or companies have approached us who have first gone into China and first signed a deal, and in this case is a European fashion firm, on the back of an invoice and some paperwork, to be fair, like you would in many other economies such as the UK. However, when the client has turned around and asked for local billing, for example, in this case, and therefore different tax rates applied, it resulted in the company losing money on the deal, and as a result, unfortunately, exiting China on the back of it, because their first deal wasn't profitable, and it's unlikely that they would see further opportunity there. This is just to emphasize, getting it right first time really is the difference between success and failure for your business in China. So in order to improve your ability to get paid in China, it's important to understand the context in which you're operating in. And most importantly, why is it such a challenge? And so I'll just quickly take you through some of the main reasons of why it is such a challenge to get paid in China sometimes. And therefore, you'll be able to understand the context in which you're operating in and act accordingly. Firstly, around China's VAT and tax system. So whether you are transacting domestically or internationally in China, Chinese VAT system works very differently to many other Western economies in particular. And it's all based upon something called a fapiao. That's F-A-P-I-A-O. And if you learn anything from this webinar, which I hope you do, you should go away and remember this word and go and Google it, understand the context of it. And what a fapiao means is basically a Chinese VAT invoice. And every company registered in China has a fapiao printing machine that prints these physical pieces of paper. And as soon as they're printed, the tax bureau is informed and VAT is payable on that transaction within that month. So only Chinese registered companies have the ability to issue a Chinese VAT invoice or fapiao. And if you are transacting internationally, it's important to understand this because for many Chinese companies, if they have issued a VAT invoice to another customer, for example, but within that month have not received funds, then it often results in a bit of a cash crunch. And therefore, if you're getting delayed payment from a Chinese customer, even internationally, this can often explain the reason why. Obviously, if you're a domestic company and you have a subsidiary in China or working through an agent, then it's also crucial to structure payment terms in a way where you get paid in China before the tax is due in order to avoid a cash crunch where you're paying more tax out before you receive any in. Very different to UK self-declaration model. It's much more ongoing and it's managed much tighter in China by the tax bureau there. So for example, we've worked with design agencies who learned the hard way after structuring their payment terms on 90 days from the issuance of a fapiao, which essentially meant they were paying tax several months before they received any income. And as an SME, that is less than ideal. The next point is around China's restricted capital account. This, in essence, is talking about the restrictions around the movement of foreign currency in and out, but particularly out of China. So this impacts on many deals in China. So for example, we worked with a major Premiership football club who entered into a deal with a major Chinese state-owned enterprise. As a state-owned enterprise, it wasn't surprising to us, although perhaps surprising to the football club over here, that they didn't have the ability to make an overseas payments in foreign currency or otherwise, because as a state-owned enterprise and very close to the government, it's a very sensitive area for them to be moving money out of China. And therefore, just important to establish that early on, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail later, but the context is that China still maintains, despite recent reforms and efforts to liberalize this area and to internationalize the renminbi, still maintains quite heavy restrictions on the movement of capital and money out of China. And therefore, you may come across many companies who can't pay you internationally overseas. The reasons for which vary depending upon the company situation, but that's the context that they're working in. So the next one is around language and communication. Very simple, but it does cause headaches in China. So, the reasons that we see this causing a headache is mainly around two parties talking at cross purposes. So, and the main one we see is around when a client quotes a price to a Chinese customer, and that Chinese customer expects that price to be gross and inclusive of all taxes and other costs. In the UK, it's very normal to add 20% VAT onto an invoice after you've quoted. Most people accept that because it's easily deductible in China. Chinese clients expect the price that you quote to include that already, and they'll not accept circumstance where you try and add it afterwards, after you've realized what taxes are due. So that's a key one to look out for. This one, it kind of still is more cash over credit society. Credit's still limited, especially for SMEs. So again, it's important to understand that more cash flow limited environment that a lot of Chinese companies operate in. And finally, lack of enforcement. And again, China has made improvements in terms of the impartiality and rule of law, but foreign companies still have challenges in Chinese courts. But there are things that you can do to improve or strengthen your hand when you're trying to enforce payments in China. Firstly, bilingual contracts. All contracts should be in English and Chinese. And the gold standard really is to have a contract with your Chinese customer and a local subsidiary, whether that's your own subsidiary or through an agent. But that's because you'll have the ability to use a Chinese top, so a stamp, seal, which most Western economies went out of fashion decades ago, but very much used in China and given more enforceability than even a signature. And when you're trying to enforce payments, to have a stamped contract is really the gold standard. So we'll move on very quickly to how to avoid some of the pitfalls. That's the context of trying to get paid in China. Those are some of the challenges. So what some of the things you can do to improve your ability to get paid? Well, firstly, understand the options available to your Chinese customer. So can they pay in foreign currency to your overseas account, or do they require you to transact with them locally and therefore for you to pay all of the taxes due on that? You need to ask this question very early on, because the tax, the documents, the net margin are all different depending on the answer to this question. So if you can transact internationally or in international payments, great. Issue the PO, make sure you've got the contracts, get paid, deliver the service. But if in the case you do need a domestic payment, and this is a picture of Fapiao, I think taken in our office in Beijing, you will need a local entity, you will need the ability to issue one of these pieces of paper, you'll need to consider Chinese VAT, corporation tax, and the flow of payments. And one hidden pitfall, actually, where some companies get caught out is if they've quoted based upon the assumption that they'll pay internationally, but actually the client requires this, domestic payments, and as a result, if they quoted US dollars, but they need to go to renminbi and the exchange rate is not in their favor, then you can very easily lose margin on that deal. Payment terms and leverage. So again, you may have started to gather the environment in China is challenging, and thus there's less of a trust environment. You don't start service and products on credit as easily as you do in most other Western economies. And most companies therefore consider leverage, other points of leverage within the delivery of their service or product, whereby they can maintain that leverage over payments, especially in the case of delayed payments. So we work with a video production agency who made sure that any videos were of a lower quality until they got paid in full, and then they released a higher resolution version. Think about your own product and service and how that applies. Only documents and contracts, we've mentioned this, always have a bilingual contract in place. Ideally have that chopped, signed, sealed by a local company, whether that's your subsidiary or a local agent. And very briefly, with these 20-minute webinars are meant to be a snapshot of a key issue, operational pain point for companies doing business in China, and give you insights into how you can overcome those. So with payment, get it right first time, make sure you understand what a 5PL is, confirm the payment options available to your Chinese customer early on, maintain that leverage, and protect yourself through local contracts. And that wraps it up in terms of the content of this webinar today. As Dave mentioned, these are 20-minute bite-sized webinars packed with insights and knowledge to grow your business in China. LNP China are here to help many companies over the years. We have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, and the UK. If you have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much, Alex. We do have one question actually. Does a rep office count as a local entity?
It does, however, the rep office doesn't have the ability to issue a only a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, or WFOE in short, which is your subsidiary in China, has the ability to issue a VAT invoice in China. Rep office just allows you usually to employ staff in China, and it's usually in the case where those members of staff are business development or marketing or sales, but the actual sales are fulfilled overseas.